I'm going to introduce our guests of honor here. Anwen Crawford is a Sydney-based writer, critic, and visual artist. Her essays have appeared in publications including The New Yorker, The White Review, Frieze, The Monthly, Best Australian Essays, Overland, and the Sydney Review of Books. Her book, Live Through This, in 2015, on the whole album of the same name, is published by Bloomsbury and was named by Pitchfork as one of the best 33 and a thirds. She is a graduate of Sydney College of the Arts, where she studied photography, and the School of the Arts, Columbia University, where she completed a Master of Fine Arts in Poetry. She will be in conversation this evening with Juliana Spahr, the author of 8 volumes of poetry, including The Winter the Wolf Came, Well Then There Now, and Response, winner of the National Poetry Series Award. She's also the editor with Claudia Rankine of American Women Poets in the 21st Century and received the O.B. Hardison Jr. Poetry Prize from the Folger Shakespeare Library. So really looking forward to this reading and conversation, and I will turn it over to Anwen and Juliana.
Thank you. Hi, Juliana. Hi. Hi, everyone. It's a little bit strange because we can't see anyone else, so, you know, I feel like I'm slightly talking into a void, but that's okay. Thank you for joining wherever people are. I think we're going to just start with the reading, right? Is that the idea? Yeah. So, hi everyone. I'm Anwen, in case you couldn't already tell from my Australian accent. I'm joining you today from Camaragal country in North Sydney. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. It's midday on Tuesday here, and it's winter. And I guess I'm just going to read a little bit from this book of mine, No Document, which was published in Australia in April last year and is about to be published, I think, tomorrow, Wednesday, by Transit in the US, with this beautiful cover that is maybe a little hard to see in this light, but trust me, it's very nice. This is a hard book to like extract, pick a point to read from because of the way that it's structured. Maybe we can talk about that. So I might just read the beginning. Something's just popped up in the chat about some sound problems, so I'm just going to lean in, and hopefully people can hear me. Does someone want to say in the chat whether I can be heard before I launch into reading? Can you hear me, Juliana? Okay. Good. All right.
Yes, I have no trouble hearing you. You sound great, but I'm like, where's the chat?
I can see it on the side. All right. Okay. All right. Well, I'm just going to read like a couple of pages from the very opening of this book, No Document, which, I mean, we can talk about what the book is, but it's primarily an elegy. So I'll just begin there, and without further ado, I'll read a little bit from it. I apologize in advance for mangling any French phrases that are in here. There's a few of them and I don't speak French, so apologies if you do, and my terrible French is offensive. Okay, here we go. No Document. Georges Franju's documentary Le Sang de Bête begins with the slaughter of a white horse, or so I had remembered. A man leads a horse by its bridle through the gates of an abattoir. The horse and the man stand together in the courtyard of the abattoir. The pressure applied by the man as he places a captive bolt gun to the head of the horse appears gentle as the touch of one's lips upon the face of a person to whom you are saying goodbye, and perhaps for a long time. I was young for a long time. Nobody died. Perhaps I wanted to die or thought that I did, but that is not the same. As the man drives the bolt through the brain of the white horse, its legs buckle instantaneously. It seems to bounce from the pavement into the air before crashing onto its flank. To be stunned. The word comes from thunder. What I really mean is that no death had overturned me. During the second semester of my first year at art school, you bring a sequence of black and white photographs to class. Our first year at art school. Some years after your death, I find a notebook in which you have written my work in blunt pencil, as you always wrote, and then crossed out the my for our work. I think of the way in which the horse turns its head in order to face the man who holds the captive bolt gun, or the texture of the back of your hands and the ways in which you moved them. The photographs you bring into class show you kneeling at night on a pavement, digging through the concrete till it cracks, and then planting a sapling in the new wound. Sur le paves, la plage. That's when I know we have to be friends. Your white skin tanned, your brown paneled nylon zip-up jacket, the rat's tail of red hair that ran below your shoulders till you cut it off your hands. Or does the man who holds the gun pull upon the horse's bridle? On my laptop, I watch a contemporary drama set in London, featuring two women who are asylum seekers from Syria. Only it transpires that the women are not Syrian, they are Iraqi, and this makes them economic migrants, not asylum seekers, and so they are taken into detention. At the detention center, a guard observes to a cop. It's a lot like a slaughterhouse. You need to calm the animals. The first thing we make is a fence on Wongal country, unrolling the wire mesh across the width of the gallery. For an instant, with its forelegs drawn into the air, the stunned horse recalls a statuary horse on a carousel. I'll stop there.
Yeah. It's so weird with no audience that you can see, but that was a beautiful reading.
Thank you.
And that's the beginning.
It is,
right?
yes. That's like the opening page and a bit. If you like that, you'll love another 160 pages worth. It's the beach read of the year.
I like that, and I like the other 160 pages too a great deal, which is maybe how we should just start, which is that like I hadn't read I thought I hadn't read your work before, but it turned out I had, because when I looked you up on the internet, I'd read the pieces that you wrote for the New Yorker, and just hadn't really processed that the connection in some way. But it's a really beautiful book. I highly recommend everyone get it. And it's not a beach read, right? It's an elegy, but yet it's incredibly readable. Like I read it all one morning before I got out of bed, and it was really great read, and quite beautiful. And I kind of compulsively couldn't stop reading it. So I was really glad to have read it. And then yes, we're just going to ask. We've got some questions that we're going to ask, and I'm going to ask, and then maybe have a conversation off of that. And if there's some other section that you feel like you want to read, you can read in between, which would also be excellent. But I think my main question, or my main thing that I like so much about this book is I feel like I've been art and me, or poetry and me, aren't getting along very well right now. I felt like so much of this book was kind of getting at some of the kinds of like complications around the reasons why I feel like we're not getting along super well. Because so much of this book is about making art, or about how you make art and what it means to make art kind of in the midst of everything that else that's going on. I was really interested in like that it seems to be so much a defense of it doesn't say stop doing it, right? It's not that that kind of like how can you possibly, like continue on, but it kind of many moments of it kind of defends a more ephemeral practice, or like a practice that might be trying to think about forms of art that are maybe outside of let's say major museums in some way, or like outside of that whole economy, which is actually is not the reason why poetry and I don't get along right now, because poetry doesn't have that economy, but it's one of the reasons why art and I sometimes don't get along all that well. And yet at the same time, like you turn to these pieces like the Felix Gonzalez Torres or the Kandinsky or the Franz Marc. You talk a lot about film. I mean, I guess, there's that quote that you had where you said, art is not precious and neither is politics. And that somewhat that tension between ephemeral, the ephemerality of that Felix Gonzalez Torres piece, which is that one that he has, that has the posters that are given out so that people can pick up, and the artwork eventually disappears, which has a certain ephemerality to it. And the way that, but it circulates only in the kind of museum culture in some sense. I think those are the kind of questions I was having, is like, what is it about art that you're kind of thinking about or trying to think through?
Yeah, what is it? I'm not even sure myself. I mean, but perhaps I can try and arrive at an answer by maybe explaining a little bit more for people of the background of the book, and I guess its context. Yeah, it is an elegy, and as you may have picked up from the bit that I read, it's written in memory of a very dear friend of mine who I met at art school in the early 2000s, 2001, when we were first year photography students at Sydney College of the Arts. And, we quickly became kind of collaborative partners, and we worked together all the way through art school and then after it. And, I've always loved collaboration, and it's a unique kind of intimacy to have with someone, to be not only friends with them, but to have that kind of intimacy that you build through creating, through making art together. And we came from, I guess, different backgrounds in terms of art making, but from similar mindsets. I kind of started when I was a teenager making zines, and I still make zines. And, for anyone that doesn't know, zines are like kind of DIY photocopied, things, booklets, pamphlets, whatever that you kind of put together. And I started making those as a teenager. And so I kind of arrived at art school off the back of zines that I'd made. That was my kind of portfolio, so to speak, was a bunch of zines. And my friend for whom this book is written, he'd started as a teenager as a graffiti artist, kind of graffitiing on the trains and in the train tunnels and stuff like that. So, and I remember I thought about putting this quote in the book. I didn't, but in a letter he wrote to me once, there are lots of kind of quotes from our correspondence to each other in the book, but in a letter he wrote to me once, he kind of described our collaboration as what happens when a zine maker and a graffiti artist kind of run into each other in the street and walk away with each other's bags. We kind of swapped, when we met, we kind of, I guess, that confluence of coming, like being really passionate about making things and wanting to make things together. And I guess coming from those kind of subcultural communities where making things together and making things for an audience, as you say, that's kind of outside the economy of like the fine art museum and all of that, that was really important to us. It was very central to us. And making work that was designed to disappear. So a lot of what I describe in this book is not only work that we made, but when we got to art school work, we started looking at like people like Felix Gonzalez Torres, who we kind of, you know, we were looking, I guess, at that point within more of the art world as an established thing of, okay, well, who else has done this? Like, who else has made work that was primarily designed to be ephemeral? Because most of the work that we did together was out on the street. It was in abandoned buildings. It was on billboards, things like that. So most of it would be gone within a day or two because it would simply be painted over or whatever. It was all, you know, illegal work. So it would only last for a matter of hours or days, and then it would be gone. And then all that we had was the documentation. And of course, the notion of the document and what a document can do and what it can't do is embedded in the book. But yes, and that part that you quoted again, that was something that we wrote together, and I'd forgotten that we'd written it, and I came across it when I was working on the book, this kind of little essay we'd written together at art school. And, you know, and we had this line about art is not precious, neither is politics. And, you know, the important thing to add here is that we were both also very involved in activism, you know, and so he was a political comrade as much as a friend and a collaborator. And that blurry line for us between, you know, we were very interested in making art. It's such a complicated question of how art and activism can interact, and it's not one I ever feel like I've arrived at at a resolution for. But, you know, but that too is important to us. And I think that those lines, art is not precious, neither is politics, we were kind of trying to get at something about the ways in which we believe that neither should be things that kind of circulate like above us. You know, there's often this feeling when you're in an art museum, you know, or when you're kind of watching politics. I mean, I think of like a formative influence on me as a teenager was reading the work of the Situationist International, right? And they have this notion of you know, that the only way forward really for the avant-garde and for radicals is for art. They use this term of art as a specialized field, you know, the idea of art as kind of part of the spectacle, that has to be destroyed, and that the making of that the kind of creative impulse has to be re-embedded back in our everyday lives, that it's not something out here. It's not something that we kind of are passive in the face of, as we're often made to feel in a museum, or, you know, when we're watching the kind of spectacle of politics play out on the television. That both of these are things that that we should and can in some way intervene in on a very kind of daily practical level, you know. Yeah, so that's part of what the book's about.
I was thinking when you were talking about the Situationists, I was like, oh, right, that's everyone's kind of like gateway drug, right?
Yeah, totally.
You know, of a certain generation, that's the text that you turn to in some sense. And I was trying to think about like, I was thinking not like, I think it's still a gateway drug. So it wasn't a question about whether it's a gateway drug, but do those ideas whether as you go on or something like, or, you know, as you've kind of like lived with them, would you still hold true to some of those moments? Because I mean, that is that question you were saying about you can't figure out where the overlap between art and politics, or how they get together in some sense, or are they together, or they have an answer to that, right? You know, there's one answer was, you know, bring the art into the political realm in some way.
Yes, and also this notion that the artist must be destroyed, in a sense, must be overcome. Like, again, this notion of kind of art as a specialized field. I mean, Guy Debord was kind of notorious for excommunicating people who were within the SI who kind of got too deep into what he saw as the art world, who regarded themselves too much as artists with a capital A, you know. I mean, yeah, the funny thing is that, like, you know, I think, I mean, I kind of came to that stuff through pop music in the 90s. I mean, I have that's where I started writing about popular music in zines, and I do have a background as a popular music critic. So there was always for me this interesting tension of having arrived at this kind of, you know, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, this kind of like these kind of radical political critiques through pop music, which is the ultimate kind of mediated, commodified art form, you know. And I wrote once in another context in a zine actually about how the kind of central contradiction of my life is my equal fidelity to both radical politics and pop music, because in a post-revolutionary world you wouldn't have pop music, right? So which one do I actually believe in more? Do I believe in pop music, or do I believe in revolution? You know, and there is pop music in this book too. I mean, it kind of couldn't help but creep in, because again, you know, in all seriousness, like as a kind of teenager, it's a kind of teenager, and I think there's a refrain in the book of being kind of teenage in the 90s, and part of the reason that's there is not nostalgia. It's kind of trying to mark that coming of age period, like post Cold War, post kind of fall of the Soviet Union, where any alternative to capitalism was kind of seen as being completely off the table, you know. So as a teenager at that time, kind of trying to find your way to anti-capitalist politics was actually quite difficult, because people would just look at you like you were crazy, like literally, like what the hell are you talking about? You know, it was a strange moment in which to arrive at kind of radical politics, radical left politics. But I got sidetracked there. What I was trying to say was that my model of collaboration, like when I arrived at art school as an 18-year-old or whatever, my primary model of collaboration was bands, right? It was pop musicians. Like that was where I saw collaborative practice. And again, you know, even in a fine art context, I was thinking about this the other day, like it's been really interesting to see in the past few years how within the fine art world, you know, things like the Turner Prize or the Whitney or whatever, like collectives and collaborations have really become a thing, you know, whole exhibitions full of kind of collaborative projects and art collectives, and that's kind of great. But again, like that moment when we were at art school in the early 2000s was very anti collaboration. Like even within the art school, not so much from our teachers, but from our fellow students, even then the reception was quite hostile. It was like, well, what are you doing? Like why? It was almost like we were cheating, like we were being lazy by putting our heads together, you know. So it's interesting how the kind of historical context changes around you. But yes, we were looking for kind of models, and my main model was pop musicians, because I couldn't really find collaboration in the art world apart from in historical examples, right? You know, so I was looking back to kind of modernist kind of groupings and collectives from the early 20th century, and then I was looking to pop bands, and they were my two models, really.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought of like the music band as like a kind of collaborative, a place where collaborative practice continues to happen in some way. That's what we're talking about. Like I was thinking about the hesitations around collaboration. I collaborate a lot. I find it really helpful. And less boring, right? Who wants to talk to themselves?
yeah, that's right.
But that there's a moment when I was part of this kind of like rotating series of readings, and I had worked with a number of people, and we had written these collaborative things in which we thought collaboration was a universal good, was kind of like our presumption. And then when we would go to read the collaborations, it was really annoying to everyone, in part because they were too long. But the other thing being that they felt exclusionary. Like the minute you had a collaborative force, other people, there was an inside and an outside to it. And I just remember them kind of like arguing with us about it and being kind of like fascinated by the argument, because I've never thought about it as kind of having a groupishness to it, but it does in some sense. But is that good or bad? Who knows?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, I think I know for the two of us, for the kind of collaborative relationship that this book is about, that we were very interested in the notion and tried to put it into practice, that even though we had this collaboration, that it would almost be like a cell that would replicate itself, right? You know, that you could expand these relationships outwards, both in terms of activism and in terms of art making. But it's interesting you say that, because someone said something very similar to me last year when this book was published in Australia. They read it and they were like, yeah, and they were almost kind of, again, there was a certain hostility there, like, oh, you know, what you're talking about is a very kind of exclusive kind of relationship. And I hadn't quite thought about it in those terms before. I think we were very interested in as something that was outwards facing, you know, to the world. And I tried to do that in this book, I guess. Like, I don't think of it as a memoir, you know. I've seen it described that way a few times, but it's not really I don't think of it as even though a lot of it's drawn from my life, I don't think of its primary subject as being me, nor is its primary subject the person to whom it's dedicated. Like, the subject is us, and kind of us in the world. And I guess I think of myself as the kind of subjective framework through which the book is built, but I don't really think of myself as the book's subject, you know. But I was thinking, on the note of bands, maybe I could read like just another page. Again, it's from quite close to the beginning, but it kind of it illustrates this notion, perhaps. Should I do that?
Yes, please.
All right. So again, this is from fairly close to the start, but this will kind of give you the idea, the context for people who haven't read it. I went to art school thinking, start a band, change the world. This was hopelessly outmoded. I liked the idea of art school far more than the reality, but then my idea was a bake of common people and what I'd read about the Bauhaus. De Blaureiter and Associates, from left, Maria Mark, Franz Marc, Bernhard Kohler, Heinrich Klampendonck, Thomas van Hartmann, Vasily Kandinsky. I applied to art school because of pop music, more or less. Owing most things in my life to pop music, including an indelible hatred of wage labor. I was teenage in the 90s and it felt like the answer was to die, but what was the question? Something to do with shopping centers, something to do with microwaves. The weekend after leaving the psych ward, I went back to work. Well, I had to pay the rent. Bosnia, suburbia, band t-shirts, recuperation, Nokia mobile phones, ads in bus stops, export processing zones. Have I told the joke about a friend who shelved Tony Blair's memoir in the true crime section? What was the question? I dreamt I went to Woomera again. Dreamt when I was 17 of an arms dealer waving me behind a curtain, and the dust and nausea has never left. Saw a color plate of Franz Marc's painting in a book, Tir Schicksale, The Fate of the Animals. I bring things together, but the young stay dead, stay beautiful, we used to say. Now I want it to mean dwell for a time, lightly in time, my friends. Woomera, I should explain for the Americans who are here. So a lot of this book has to do with histories of border control in Australia, both in the early 2000s and also historically, again, because that was activism that my friend and I were heavily involved in which I'm still involved in to some degree. So Woomera was a detention center in the middle of the desert, a notorious immigration detention center that existed on the mainland in the early 2000s. But this was also at a time when the kind of government policy around immigration detention was shifting to what's known as offshore detention, which is a regime that's still in place in Australia, where asylum seekers who arrive by boat are kind of stopped by the Navy before they arrive at the mainland, and they are then forcibly transferred to detention centres that exist on Nauru and Manus Island, and at certain times Christmas Island has also been used. So Nauru obviously is a sovereign country, but Australia has a parasitical kind of neo-colonial relationship with that country, and has used it as a place to kind of imprison asylum seekers. And Christmas Island is a territory that's administered by Australia, that's way up in the Indian Ocean. It's closer to Indonesia than to the Australian mainland. But for the purposes of immigration law, it's actually not counted anymore as part of Australia. So if you are an asylum seeker and you land on Christmas Island, you're not considered to have a claim to asylum in Australia, because for the purposes of immigration law, you haven't arrived in Australia. It's this very kind of Kafkaesque, legal regime that exists. So that's what Woomera, and it's a place that comes up several times in the book because I went there to this detention center.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, that question, I mean, you're constantly, I mean, one of the things the book does is it's constantly putting like this, high art, other forms of art, politics, kind of like in this kind of like dialogue, and kind of like pressuring it all together in some sort of like wonderful pressure cooker. And I keep thinking, I mean, that like that, just in that very moment that of that passage that you just read, like, is it, what do we make of that? I don't know, what do I want to say, like cultural production in that moment? Like, can it change the world? Like what does it do? Like, why have you put it? Why have you brought those things into proximity? Other than they are the way that people live a life, which I think is a perfectly legitimate answer to that. But are there other reasons that they're in proximity there? Because it feels like they do feel like they keep pressure. They put a lot of pressure on it.
You mean like the kind of combination of, as you say, the kind of like the fine art that we might think of, and the kind of pop culture and those things together.
And then combined with the kind of like the large political questions around, like the border that does show up all the time.
I mean, yeah, like I think because they are the way that you live a life, or they are the way that I've lived my life is part of the answer. It's also that I guess I've always been, I mean, I'm someone who's been involved in kind of the left, the kind of far left in Australia for a long time, and I think I came up early against a kind of frustration with, maybe it's not so much the case anymore, but again, I feel like there was a point in time, maybe when I first became involved in activism in the 90s and early 2000s, where trying to think about cultural questions or like cultural production from a radical perspective was not something that was very much encouraged, like at least within the circles I was moving. It was kind of like, well, that's frivolous and we can think about that later, you know, like that comes afterwards, comrade, kind of thing. And I just always found that deeply frustrating and kind of short-sighted, but in a funny way. I mean, as I say this, I'm thinking about the kind of position we're in now and the place that culture occupies in the kind of discourse, political discourse, and now I feel like we're kind of in an inverse situation where people talk a lot about culture and are quite savvy about the kind of politics of popular culture, but it's almost like that's it. It's like, oh, well, if we just like fix the TV shows, then everything will come right. And it's like, well, no, that's just the inverse position, you know, like base and superstructure people, base and super, like it has to be both, you know, like, so it's part of it. It's part of about thinking, you know, what does it mean to think about culture and to think about cultural production, you know, in light of the kind of economic and political realities that we live in. But what does it also mean to not think that, that simply kind of tinkering with cultural production is enough, you know, that both things have to be done. And like I said, you know, should the world I ever wish to see come into being, pop music specifically will cease to exist because it's a form that's born out of commodification and mass production and capitalism and all of the kind of alienated emotions that capitalism produces, and that's its power and that's also its limitation. So what do you do with that? What do you do with that as a radical, knowing that part of what you wish for would see the end of cultural production that is actually really important to you?
I'm fascinated by that argument, which I've heard other people make the same thing too. And I mean, I think parts of that argument are very true, right? The way that we distribute any kind of mass popular culture is very much shaped by capitalism or by the idea that, you know, like the art form, you know, can kind of go and sell. But I'm always like, can't we hold on to some of it? Can't we hold on to good songs?
Exactly. Yeah, totally. Yeah, like, but what will that look like, right? I mean, that's not a question we can answer until we arrive there. That's a question that has to be answered in the making. Because I agree. I'm like, can't we hold on to some of it? You know, I don't want like, you know, I don't want to live through another cultural revolution, but like, what does it mean? You know, what does it mean in practice to try and create work, not just in kind of opposition to, I mean, that's the thing, right? Like a lot of, sometimes we can get kind of caught in a trap of making work that's kind of reactive to the circumstances that we're living in. What might it mean to make work that kind of looks forward, or that leaves something open? I mean, I guess one of the things that was really important to, you know, this collaborative partnership I had with my friend for whom this book is written is that we were always, and part of the reason that we chose to work so much on the street and out in public is that we were always really interested in the notion that the audience completes the work, you know, that you as the maker are not the that you kind of, you make the work, but to enact a kind of democratic art making process, that part of what you have to do is to make a work that's open enough that people can that people in a sense activate it by encountering it, you know, and that everyone will encounter it differently. And I guess part of what I tried to do with this book in terms of its formal qualities is to, you know, it's a book that involves a lot of fragmentation and a lot of appropriation, like textual appropriation, and a lot of, I wanted to kind of have all these pieces kind of hanging in the balance, but not in such a way that I was dictating an argument. I mean, I think the politics of the book are pretty clear, you know, but nevertheless, I wanted, it was important to me to try and write something from which everyone would in a sense be able to put it together how they wanted, you know, and that you would, each person would kind of walk away from it with something different, because you've been asked as a reader to kind of meet it halfway, you know, and to be engaged with it. Because again, I know very well that, like, you know, there's a lot of terrible political work that's made that's like dogmatic and, you know, way too simple, and that asks nothing of me as a reader or as a viewer. And I kind of hate that work. There's nothing that irritates me more than work that doesn't take me seriously as an audience member, because it doesn't want me to do anything. I find even if that work is made with good intentions, I find it profoundly undemocratic, you know, and I want work that invites me to be active in the making of its meanings. Yeah, and I wanted to do that in this book too.
Yeah, I think that's actually really interesting. What do you mean by textual appropriation?
I mean, the book's just got a lot of bits in it that are taken from other texts, you know, and a lot of those are like newspaper reports, radio transcripts, that kind of, again, like documentation that's on the public record. There's stuff from photography manuals, there's stuff from children's reference books, there's stuff from, you know, again, yeah, interviews, like, again, like pulling from kind of like pop magazines. And so there's all kinds of stuff in there, and some of it is more obvious than other. Like, some of those appropriations are kind of marked in a textual sense. I'm just trying to find an example to like show for the camera. So, like, you know, it's a bit hard to see because of the light, but like the book involves like a lot of strike throughs and stuff like that, where I've appropriated text and then kind of manipulated it. But there are other instances where I might just have kind of like dropped a sentence into the middle of the paragraph that's appropriated from somewhere, but you might not realize that because I haven't marked it as such. And again, I think is something like sampling. Like, I've always loved that feeling sometimes of, like, you know, years later you will encounter the original source from which another song used a sample, and you just think, oh wow, and it kind of puts the other work in a whole new context. So I like that idea that maybe there are things in my book that by some accident people will come across the original context of that sentence 5 or 20 years down the track and be like, oh, that's where that came from, because I didn't include any citations.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I keep thinking about I don't know, that the kind of like, I mean, appropriation is another one of those things that I think is like a concept that only comes out of a capitalist moment in some sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm kind of always interested in the moments when it doesn't, like, I wouldn't make too much of them, but it is like this idea that someone owns this arrangement of these words that a large amount of culture is kind of created in some way. Is that I wanted to ask you about that one of those quotes, a quote. We've got to play ordinary venues at the moment, but I dream of playing the rubble of London's palaces.
Do you want me to read that?
Yeah.
I'll just read that passage. It kind of goes to some of what we're talking about. If I can find it, of course, that is the question. It's a problem with it with a new edition is it's discombobulated me in terms of the pages.
It's page 116.
Oh, thank you. Okay, this is just like one paragraph. Do I think that art can change the world? No and yes. We can't end work or war with pencils or by arguing for better television shows. But there are no movements towards freedom without what must be imagined and perhaps can only be imagined. I believe that. Another way to put this would be to say that I believe in all of us because of all who have imagined this in the act of remaking a street or a room through some gesture of their hands, by writing or painting or playing, no matter how tentative the gesture or how ephemeral the evidence. We've got to play ordinary venues at the moment, but I dream of playing the rubble of London's palaces. Yeah, so that last sentence is an example of something I just dropped in from another source. I mean, I think it's quite literal. I think that the rubble of London's palaces is the rubble of London's palaces. I mean, you know.
Well, I love that it's a sentence from somewhere else. Do you remember where it's from?
I do, but I'm not going to say. I know where it's from, but I'm not going to reveal my source. I mean, this is part of the problem with the internet, right? You can probably go and Google it and find it in about half a second, but that takes some of the don't do that. That takes the romance away. Yeah, no. I know where it's from. But yeah, and and again, like part of the reason I dropped it in there is just that beautiful contradiction of like pop musicians talking about like, you know, the wreckage of the kind of class system. I mean, it is a contradiction, and it's not a contradiction in terms of, again, what we've discussed. But yeah, what will we do? You know, I mean, we just had the Jubilee, which I'm sure is not a thing in the States and not really a thing here, but nevertheless, we're still not Australia is still not a republic, right? So yesterday was a public holiday for the Queen's birthday. You know, what are we going to do? What are we going to do with those palaces? Like when we reappropriate them, are we just going to like raise them to the ground, or are we going to turn them into roller skating rinks? Like, what are we going to do with them? Yeah, I'd like to know, because they sure need to be turned into something else.
Yeah, I don't know. It's part of me would be like, you got to get rid of them because they can't. They can only return back to their original state.
Right? Yeah, totally. Yeah, exactly. Like, yes, what does, like, the fact, like, once that idea is in the world, you know, it's going to reinstate itself. So you have to get rid of the palaces. But also, how many rooms does Buckingham Palace have? Like, hundreds. Maybe we can do something useful with them. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, do you think that art can change the world? Or are you still going to say no and yes? What's the no part? What's the yes part?
Yeah. I don't think art can change the world in and of itself, you know, and I think, yeah, this is some of my frustration with the kind of, you know, that if we just kind of change modes of cultural production, everything will be okay. I don't think art has that power, but I do think that its effect, and I mean, I can only really extrapolate here from my own life, but that the effect and the I guess the intellectual and political and aesthetic and spiritual and whatever else you want to call it kind of power of encountering art in whatever form, whether that's, you know, zines or crochet or pop music or film or whatever in your own life. The effect of those things is unquantifiable, and I think that it does make a meaningful contribution, or at least it's made a very meaningful contribution to my life in terms of thinking about, you know, how to the kind of world that I would like to live in. You know, I mean, I think there can be a kind of utopian impulse to a lot of art making that I believe in, and I do believe very much in, like, that once, you know, that becoming aware of the power we have to make things. And this is why I think the DIY kind of culture has always been really important to me, like becoming aware of your own ability to make things and kind of seize the means of production in whatever small way can be really powerful in terms of thinking in a larger scale about how we might drag these things, capital A art and capital P politics, like down towards us in kind of non-hierarchical ways.
That's a nice way to think about it. A third man is injured.
Hello again. Yeah, that's really a beautiful takeaway from this. I'm here to raise one audience question, and then maybe, Juliana, if you have a closing question, if there's anything else that we want to ask, we could wrap it up from there. So this is a question from a reader who knows the book very well. You mentioned strike-throughs and insertions, but could you talk a little more about the book's form? I came late to the realization that it even contains a ghost text in the lines that appear blank on the page.
Oh, yes. Did this come from Adam?
So I know, the book comes out tomorrow. We're so excited for everyone to have it. But yes, this question comes from one of the book's publishers and editors.
So, so like I briefly mentioned, the book contains a lot of this, like a lot of these kind of strike throughs, which, I was interested in for various reasons, partly for visual reasons, right? Because they kind of look like borders, they look like fences, they kind of look like musical staves. There are many kind of visual associations that I have with them. But the only way to kind of achieve those, or at least the only way that I could figure out in the writing of the book, was to quite literally, because I knew I wanted to strike through the text, like certain texts. I didn't want to have that text visible beneath the strike through. I didn't want to have black boxes. That was too heavy-handed. So the only solution really was to do the strike throughs and then to make the text underneath invisible. So hence the fact that this book contains a lot of ghost text, as I refer to it, which I kind of also find quite conceptually resonant. And not just there too, but like there's a lot of this kind of going on where, there are kind of alternating passages on verso and recto, and the text will kind of move down the page, and the rest of the text is actually still there. You just can't see it because it's been set in white, because that was the only way to maintain the spacing and to kind of keep a consistency going. So it's a book for which I don't really know the word count, because the actual word count is different to what is visible on the page, because there is a lot of this ghost text, which for a book that concerns itself a lot with kind of disappearances, both willed and unwilled, I find quite neat conceptually that it has a lot of text in it that you can't actually see, but it's there. It's the ghost text. But it's a real pain in the ass to typeset this book, I must say, because I kind of did it like I'm very much a zine maker. I have paper brain, my friend Elias calls it. Hello, Elias, if you're here. So I think in terms of the page, and I think and very much writing this book, it was me thinking what's going to be on this page, what's going to be on the next page, like I was making a zine. But that actually makes for a kind of a nightmare when it comes to typesetting, because it's both editions of the book are in different format sizes. So it kind of means that you have to start again, in a sense, with the, you know, each time you lay out the book on a different page size, you have to kind of rejig the layout. So that wasn't very smart of me to do a book that's so page dependent, but that's what I did.
Well, I think knowing this adds to the richness of reading it. And so thanks for letting us into that process a little bit. Well, yes, we're wrapping up, but is there any final questions or remarks, anything that you haven't gotten a chance to say yet or haven't gotten a chance to ask yet before we sign off here?
I have one final question. After the revolution, what's the one song you can hold on to?
Oh no! Oh, it's like being on Desert Island Discs. Do Americans know that show? Yes, yeah.
No, I don't know the show.
Where it's like, what's the one? You know, if you're on the desert island and you have 8 songs and the waves are going to wash them away, which one do you save? Oh, I can't answer that question, Julie. That's the hardest question in the world. I don't know. I'd have to sit here for like a year coming up with my shortlist, and I just don't even know. Yeah, no, that's a truly unanswerable question, but it's a great question. I'm gonna be haunted by this question now. I'm gonna have to think about it long and hard. Yeah.
I like this reframing of the desert island type prompt.
Yeah.
It's after the revolution. What gets to stay? It's great.
Yeah. That's right. No, anything I say, any suggestion I venture forth will just be inadequate, and I'll immediately regret saying it and be like, no, that's not the one. So I'm not going to.
Thank you for giving me a chance to talk with you about the book. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. I never feel like I do a very good job. I should say for people, you know, particularly those of you joining us from the States, so even though this book came out more than a year ago in Australia, I haven't had much of a chance to talk about it because of the whole COVID thing. So I don't really have my spiel down, and I feel like I never really do a very good job at talking about it because it is quite a difficult book to like paraphrase. But thank you, Juliana, for reading it and for engaging with it so thoughtfully. And I'm going to keep thinking about keep thinking about this question.
Thank you both so much for being here for this wonderful conversation and reading. And congratulations on this publication.
Thanks for hosting this.
No documents.
Thanks to Transit too, I should say, while we're here. Thank you to Transit, my publisher in the United States. I'm very grateful to them for bringing this book out.
As are we. So I have put some links in the chat here if you're looking to pick up your copy of No Document, and also to stay in touch with the bookstore. Thank you, Anwen. Thank you, Juliana. Thank you, Transit. And thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful evening or a great Tuesday or whatever it is, wherever you are.
Yeah, I'm going back to work now. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye. Woo.